would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with The Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am The Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. I hope you found yesterday's show informative. It was actually a replay of a previous show, but it seemed like the right time to cover the subject again. It was all about self-directed IRAs, and we spoke about self-directed IRAs a couple of interviews back. So I thought it would be good to kind of recover that ground. I hope you folks found that useful. I might be able to give you a little bit of a heads up on it. I'm actually in the process of migrating a good chunk of my current retirement investment style stuff into a self-directed IRA. So as I learn new and exciting things, I'll pass that along. If you'd like to get in touch with me, the best way to do that is through the website at therebelbroker.com. From there, you can click on contacts in the menu bar and send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. Of course, while you're there, you can also click on the big red button at the top of the page titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. By doing that, yes, you will absolutely be helping the show. You'll be getting it into a position where I can turn it into something where it's self-supporting so that it allows me to do more, create more content, spend more time on the show, those kinds of wonderful things. But you'll also be putting your name in for a drawing of a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, this is something we do at the beginning of every month. And so far, I think we've given away between $500 and $600. So that's all great for all the folks who've won. Why not get your name in there so that next month when we do another drawing, you just might find yourself to be the winner of that $50 Amazon gift card. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. I came across an interesting news item today. There's a couple of interesting things in the mortgage world that we can talk about. First off, let's talk about NationStar. For those of you who aren't aware, NationStar has changed their name. Now, they did this on Monday. And I'm not real sure where they're going with this, but they renamed themselves Mr. Cooper. That's exactly right. They renamed their company from NationStar to Mr. Cooper. Now, that's an interesting change in and of itself. It might be worth talking about for a few minutes, but that is not the interesting part of this particular story. One of the features this newly reminted or rebranded company is rolling out is something that's kind of unheard of in terms of mortgage companies, and that's a credit card that's linked to your mortgage. When you use the Mr. Cooper Home Rewards credit card, you can earn cash back that's applied to the principal balance of your mortgage. That actually sounds kind of good on the face of it, right? I mean, that sounds like a step that would be good for people. I mean, we have to remember that the numbers aren't substantial. Now, the Mr. Cooper Home Rewards credit card is going to provide folks with a 1% cash back on pretty much all your purchases. And then that money is applied directly to your principal. So remember, you'd have to charge $100,000 to have $1,000 be taken off of your principal, right? So, I mean, we're not talking about huge contributions to your mortgage. Chase Mortgage is another company that rolled out an incentive program for its credit card called the Sapphire Card. But that one wasn't really geared towards helping to mitigate your principal on your mortgage. It was aimed at giving you 100,000 Chase Ultimate Rewards points that you could use for traveling, gift cards, cash back, and that type of stuff. They're quoted as saying over at Mr. Cooper, it'd be very weird to work for a company called Mr. Cooper, quote, "We're excited to soon offer our customers an easy way to put a little extra toward the principal balance of their home loan with Mr. Cooper," according to the chief marketing officer at Mr. Cooper. He went on to say, "The Mr. Cooper Home Rewards credit card is one of several new products we'll be rolling out to help our customers realize their dream of home ownership and give them a more rewarding home loan experience along the way." There's not a whole lot of detail on the card right now. So as more comes out, I'll pass it along. In terms of groundbreaking stuff, I think this is interesting. It's not huge, but it's a nice gesture. But part of me wonders if there isn't a potential for this to represent more harm than good. Let me just say this. Any amount going towards your principal is a good thing. And just like everything else, particularly things when it comes to finance, discipline is the key, right? The one thing I would not like to see come out of this is a mindset on the part of consumers that, well, hey, part of this is going towards my mortgage. I should charge more. We're already seeing crazy levels of debt in terms of the public sector, to the point where it's crippling in a lot of cases. We're seeing a lot of folks that are charging day-to-day life things on their credit card and then holding that balance. So I'm concerned that this mentality that might be encouraged with this might be a little bit more freewheeling for folks. It might make them say, well, I'm doing myself a favor by charging this because it's going towards my mortgage, even though a ridiculously small amount is what's actually going towards that mortgage. And I think this leads us into a discussion that should be concerning, the attitude towards debt, the attitude of having more and more money that you're spending that you're not earning, right? And that you have a very difficult time paying back. There's a couple other stories I wanted to share that I think fit in really well with this and should be kind of concerning. Now, concerning. One of them is from Calculated Risk. And it's a quote from the New York Fed as their headline. Quote, household borrowing grows modestly. Credit card delinquencies rise. So we're seeing a very scary combination of things. We're seeing an increase in delinquencies on credit cards. And we're seeing an increasing willingness to charge things in general. And we're seeing now policies and encouragements being put into place that might continue to feed that and get people to think that going into debt is okay because it offsets some other thing. And typically that's folks who are less mature in their economic thinking, right? And their thinking relating to debt. But it's happening enough that I think it's something to be concerned about. Now, if we also take a look at the quarterly report on household debt and credit, we find that total household debt rose by $114 billion, almost 1%, which is $12.84 trillion in the second quarter of 2017. There were modest increases in mortgage, auto, and credit card debt, increasing by 0.7% for mortgage, 2% for auto, and 2.6% for credit card debt. No change to student loan debt, which is kind of encouraging, and a decline in home equity lines of credit, which fell by 0.9%. But flows of credit card balances into both early and serious delinquencies climbed for the third straight quarter, a trend not seen since 2009. Now, remember, 2009, we were already deep in it. Right? We still had some very bad things to get through, but the point here is that these are the kinds of things that can feed a further decline. Now, we're not at the point where I think anything's been truly pushed over the edge yet. So if anything, I'd estimate trends like this are surprising because these are things you tend to see when bad stuff is already here. But I think the reality is kind of falling in line with things we've talked about before. A lot of the jobs that we've seen come along and people celebrate and want to talk about a low unemployment rate, which we've talked about on previous shows. The real unemployment rate is actually quite a bit higher. But the point is a lot of the new jobs that we've been getting aren't career-style jobs. They aren't, I can afford to buy a house-style jobs. They tend to be in the service industry, and they also tend to be part-time jobs. So that's a concern. And I think that's one thing that feeds this trend of, charging things. And for a lot of folks, it may not be a situation where they're being irresponsible. I guess you and I could argue on the fringes of that, but it may be simply a survival thing. And if that's really where it is, that paints an even scarier picture in terms of moving forward about what's going to happen when all of this stuff really comes to a head. And some of these things really need to get paid off and dealt with. This report went on to say, and this is something from the New York Fed, aggregate housing debt, household debt balances increased in the second quarter of 2017 for the 12th consecutive quarter and are now $164 billion higher than the previous 2008 third quarter peak of $12.68 trillion. As of June 30th, 2017, total household indebtedness was $12.84 trillion, a $114 billion, 0.9% increase from the first quarter of 2017. Mortgage balances, the largest component of household debt, increased again during the first quarter, Mortgage balances shown on consumer credit reports on June 30th stood at $8.69 trillion, an increase of $64 billion from the first quarter of 2017. Balances on home equity lines of credit were roughly flat and now stand at $452 billion. Non-housing balances were up in the second quarter. Auto loans grew by $23 billion and credit card balances increased by $20 billion, while student loans were roughly flat. So you kind of put all that together, and there's some good news here, right? A year ago, we were talking about how HELOCs were really growing. In fact, it wasn't even a full year. We were talking about how the number of folks taking out HELOC debt was increasing as recently as January. So it's good to see that that is stepping back. But we're continuing to see growth in these other debt things like credit cards and whatnot that should be very concerning. But here are some creepy numbers for you. If we're talking about delinquency in terms of those credit cards we were talking about before, of the $612 billion of debt that is delinquent, $411 billion is seriously delinquent, at least 90 days late or severely derogatory. Early delinquency flows deteriorated somewhat in the second quarter from a year ago, although they have improved markedly since the recession. Student loans, auto loans, and mortgages all saw modest increases in their early delinquency flows, while delinquency flows on credit card balances ticked up notably in the second quarter. So these are all things that are concerning. And the reason why I bring this up again, and I keep revisiting this and providing updates on what the latest data shows or what's changed since the last time we discussed it, is remember, this is all about the burden that folks are bearing. It is about the debt profile that exists. Because what I'm keeping an eye out for, and maybe this is just me, maybe I'm nuts, I'm trying to figure out what are the items that could step in and really start to push the economy over to the point where folks like you and me who tend to be more focused on real estate need to start considering strategies or modifying strategies that we're already have in process to minimize our risk and to maximize the odds of us pushing through a downturn. Because remember, I tend to use history as a primary informer for me on what to expect. When I see the same things happen, same things occurring as last time, I tend to expect the same things that happened after that to occur as well in some form or another. It's not always going to be exactly the same, but the same kinds of things tend to cause the same kinds of outcomes. So the key here is to understand what point does it tip and what ends up being the thing that pushes it. Now, we can't look for a one-to-one correlation between last time, 2006, 2007, and this time. Because frankly, the biggest, craziest thing that was going on was almost exclusively real estate. Folks who maybe were more informed about the economy back then had other concerns. But in terms of the epicenter of the craziness, and ultimately the thing that really pushed stuff over the edge, it was real estate. And as I've said before, I'm not convinced that's what's going to happen this time. There are so many other things going on that are so impactful in what kind of an effect they would have and are in deep, deep trouble that it leaves me thinking the odds are real estate will simply be something that goes with the rest of it. Now, and remember, when the real estate took a dive last time, it took a whole bunch of other things with it, right? Jobs, all kinds of stuff. The market suffered. All these crazy things happen. And any one of those other things outside of real estate can also have that same effect back on real estate. And I think that when we look back on this years from now, we'll probably see that it's not the real estate market that does it, but the stock market that tends to take a hit. And if you're looking at the most impactful things right now, the things that look the scariest to me are pensions, the overvalued stock market, and real estate too, given all the crazy things we're doing that are repeats of what we've done in the past. So that's kind of why I bring that stuff up. Another interesting tidbit I think that we should bring up here, and of course, links to all these articles will be in the show notes for today's show if you're interested in checking those out for yourself. According to MarketWatch, great article, millennials are financing everything from bed sheets to concert tickets. So it's this, and again, don't think of it as individual slots. Don't think of it, well, they're not doing so bad with credit cards, they're not doing so bad with HELOCs or whatever else. It's about the overall profile of debt, right? From all the various sources. So you want to include auto, student loan, credit card, mortgage, whatever it is, you want to try to understand what the general profile is. Because my argument is once things get bad and tough decisions need to get made in terms of what they're going to cut, they make the same decisions that they did last time. And the decisions they made last time pushed things over the edge as well in terms of what they decided to stop paying. Okay. So according to this article, we have yet another way for folks to get stuff. And basically through financing, it's through credit. In recent years, payment companies, including PayPal, Affirm, and Bread, have created installment plans for retailers that give consumers the option to finance the weirdest purchases over time. These payment methods have taken hold at a time when millennials have been more reluctant than their parents to use credit cards. Millennials had about 2 credit cards each on average last year, according to the credit reporting company Experian. That's compared with about 3 for boomers and an average of 2.5 for members of Generation X. Now they don't have to wait to be able to afford that blender. They can go out and get these things going on. So this is how it works, according to this article. The company Brooklinen sells pricey sheets. Its classic sheet set for a queen-sized bed costs $129, but that can be steep for millennials born between 1982 and 1996, who are a core demographic for Brooklinen, said the company's co-founder Rich Fulop. They want to pay more, they want to upgrade, but they don't necessarily have the means to do it. What's more, the company also sells to city dwellers who are looking for just a few sets of sheets to outfit a one-bedroom or studio apartment. They're willing to invest in higher quality sheets, even when they don't have the money up front. These folks partnered with the payment company Affirm to offer a payment plan spread over 3, 6, or 12 months. Financing doesn't come cheap. Rates range from 0%, get this, to 30%. Now, this is why I wanted to share this with you, because these rates are absolutely nuts. Now, I get credit card rates in general are nuts, but these things are sort of selling themselves as a different option, but the burden in terms of interest rate is ridiculous. After a firm checks the buyer's credit and approves them, they are going to be charged that 0 to 30%. That compares to an average APR of almost 17% for credit cards, or 0 if you're paying with cash. Affirm has partnered with more than 1,000 retail partners since its launch in 2012, including travel site Expedia and furniture company Wayfair. According to Ryan Metcalf, Affirm's chief of staff and director of international markets, shoppers typically use Affirm financing plans to purchase over $200, he said, and the average loan is $800. According to this, let's see what they like to finance. PayPal offers 2 types of credit, both as part of the program called PayPal Credit. One option is to wait 6 months without paying anything and no interest on purchases over $99 from select retailers. The other option is an installment payment plan called Easy Payments. Consumers pay an interest at an APR of 19.99 if they don't first pay off their balance within the term they select. Now, this is something else I wanted to point out, because I have seen this a ton. I've seen this in everything from whether you want to talk about Home Depot and you're going to get a loan to do something to your home, or whether you're just about any credit that you're going to get for specific things, right? It has this 1 year interest free. Now, I took advantage of that, and I'm on a schedule to pay that bad boy off 24 hours before interest rates start getting charged to me. Free money is good money. I like free money. But I'm responsible enough to plan for that. I've got the date that sucker turns into starts to have an interest rate in my calendar. I will get a 7-day warning when it's going to happen. So there's no way I'm ever going to pay Home Depot a freaking dime of interest, because that's the way I do things. I put the money aside. I make maybe small payments per month just to be paying what the minimum requirement is, which all goes towards the principal. There is no interest. And then I save off the rest of it so that I'm in control of that money, and then I'm going to pay it off in a lump sum just a week before it's time to pay it off. That's the smart way to get a 0% loan. But what people have to understand, and unfortunately I don't think a lot of millennials do, is if it's fine to agree to a plan like this if you have a plan to pay it off before the interest rate kicks in, because paying an interest rate of 20% on this money is idiotic. And here's the problem that I see. I know too many people that I've worked with who have gotten themselves into deep credit problems with exactly these kinds of programs. So with the growth of this particular thing, I would be concerned that we're adding even more craziness to that debt profile from potentially more sources. It's not even just straight up credit cards anymore. It's these special financing options that you're able to get that seems to be so popular among millennials, which also happens to be that generation we're supposedly looking to as the big buyers in the real estate market. That's supposed to be the biggest segment of the market, right? So understanding what burdens these folks are under as consumers of rental properties or potential buyers of properties, I think is hugely important. Now, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about this, particularly relating to the debt side of it, right after we come back. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909.
Welcome back, everyone. We've just been sort of revisiting again or getting the latest update on what's going on with debt, particularly as it relates to credit and where folks are going, and talking about new vehicles of credit that are being introduced that I think are sort of pushing a more casual approach to debt that's aimed squarely at millennials. And we should care about that because as investors, millennials are one of our primary potential consumers, right? Or folks that are going to want our services. They are the supposedly largest group of folks that are out there doing the buying. Statistically, that appears to be the case. But as a percentage of their actual population, it's relatively small, right? They are the biggest number of buyers, but they're underrepresented in terms of how many of them are actually out there looking to buy. Now, this article from MarketWatch that we've been chatting about, in addition to the one from Calculated Risk, which sort of fit together rather nicely, now runs over sort of an overall view of consumers and debt. And so they make a couple of suggestions. And I realize most of you, the people who are actually listening to this, don't need this. Don't need this advice. You're smart about money. But some of you I know are not. I know I'm talking to a percentage of you that have never bought real estate before. You're maybe a buyer who is, or an aspiring buyer. You someday want to buy real estate and you want to buy responsibly. You want to be that financial person that we talk about who understands the ramifications of what you're doing. So I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking to those of you who have family, friends, children, brothers and sisters who are less savvy than you are about what advice to give them. Tell them what to avoid. Know what questions to ask when you're having conversations with them about money and asking them how they're affording some of the expensive things you're seeing in their apartment or in mom and dad's basement where they're living. I think that a lot of the momentum that needs to happen in terms of turning folks into much more responsible financial folks is going to come from outside. It's not going to come from some self-realization once it's too late, once they are saddled with crazy amounts of debt at 20 or 30% interest. It needs to come from folks who care about their futures, who want to give them advice or want to at least point them in the right direction to figure out what the solution is. Okay, so obviously there's the basic stuff. Always avoid making purchases that you cannot afford. If you need to buy something on layaway or something like that, I guess that's one thing. But don't enter into credit agreements that you don't feel like you can service, or if you don't have a plan to service it, or if the math simply doesn't work when you try to figure out a way to service it. And what I'm talking about are those 0% interest loans that are 0% for some period of time, whether it's 6 months, a year, 18 months. Many people are not in a position to buy pricey items. There is nothing wrong with that. Is the argument that I'd much rather buy something more expensive because it will last longer, to the point where, yes, it retains its value because instead of only lasting 6 months, it's going to last 3 years, right? I get that argument. I agree with that argument, but don't go into debt. The amount of debt you will accrue will be far more painful than you having to rebuy that item earlier than you would have bought if you bought the higher quality item, or go without that item till you can buy it. Let's see. Spreading payments out over the course of months can be risky, especially if you faced a financial emergency like a health issue or a lost job. Some consumers have shown they tend to overspend. Americans now have more than $1 trillion in outstanding revolving debt. If I'm not mistaken, that number is actually $1.26 trillion, often categorized as credit card debt, the most in U.S. history. That alone is scary as all get out. When consumers are considering taking on debt, they should carefully consider each option that you have. Pay attention to what you're using and understand that credit is a product, just like a mortgage. And there are different terms and conditions relating to those that you're going to want to understand. So shop wisely. If you can't afford the monthly payments on the Vitamix blender, you should not buy one. Quote from an advisor on these things: our mission is to improve people's lives. It's not to put them in a position that makes anything worse. And this kind of stuff can absolutely do it. So I know we've kind of approached this topic a little bit from how to prevent it in friends, but now that we've covered this, what do we want to do? And we know there's one more article I wanted to cover. I'll post this one. We won't spend a whole lot of time talking about it. This one's from Zero Hedge. And today's show, I wanted to give you sort of an update on where we stand in terms of debt. And frankly, there's no good news. I guess the only good news is we haven't seen a dramatic increase in HELOCs. The folks going out and getting HELOCs tended to peter out in the first quarter of this year. We saw a lot of growth in 2016, and then it sort of came to a halt. I think that's great news. The idea of folks continuing to get leveraged right up to the hilt on their home, I don't think is good. I think it puts them in a position where if things do turn downward, and that increases the probability that they'll owe more than the home is worth. But here's the other element, the other piece to the puzzle, which I think really is a little bit creepy. Deep subprime auto delinquencies spike to 10-year highs. Now, we'd already talked that we had seen some interesting problems with 2015 auto loans, particularly subprime auto loans, where people just stopped paying them. But now we've exceeded even that in terms of just the historical nature of these delinquencies on subprime auto loans. The article starts: if you're still on the fence about whether the auto market in this country is anything but a massive bubble being propped up by extremely loose credit underwriting standards, then we think Equifax has just proved some definitive evidence that just might push you over the edge. In discussing delinquency trends in deep subprime auto ABS deals, Equifax chief economist Amy Cruz Cutts recently pointed out that 2016 and 17 vintage deals are mysteriously performing more like 2007 securitizations than those underwritten in 2010. So this is something where when you compare it to past performance, we are seeing horrible performance on auto loans. Quote, performance of recent deep prime vintages is awful. We're seeing an increase in delinquencies across all credit scores, but in the highest credit quality, it's a basis point or two. In deep subprime, the rise is more substantial. What stood out to me, which was Amy Cruz Cutts, who's the chief economist, was the issuers. Those that have been doing this for a decade or more were showing better performance, while those that were relative newcomers were in the worse category. In April 2017, pricing on all new vehicles may include up to $1,500 in finance rebates that have certain credit requirements to be able to claim the rebate. The finance office is credit score based, and you must be below 620 to qualify. If you are over a 620, you must add up to $1,500 to the price. Varies by make and model. Not all units are eligible for this rebate. Call dealer for details. Let that sink in for a moment. This lender is actually trying to attract borrowers with lower credit scores rather than higher on a $55,000 vehicle. Now, the specific example that they're using is a decked out, it looks like a 2017 Ram 1500 Laramie truck. But this goes a step, this is the housing stuff, right? This is the no income, the ninja loans, no income, no job loans that we were seeing for so long. This is a program excluding more qualified people in favor of subprime borrowers. So this can only pave the way towards a very scary credit issue. And again, it fits in with what we've been talking about in terms of the debt profile. This is not good stuff. These are the kinds of things that can set off other problems, because remember, these are securitized too. just like home loans were back in 2005, 2006, and had been for nearly a decade by that point. These are securitized. So there are tons of folks invested in these things as instruments, right? Auto loans. And the reason why a lot of people go for them is because they have great returns. What happens if the stock market gets slammed by something like this with a ridiculous amount of delinquencies and just stuff not getting paid? Well, these end up not performing. They end up not returning any cash to the folks who invested in them. Who invests in the stock market? Well, pensions. And we've talked about pensions. Pensions are in deep trouble. If you've Googled pensions in Illinois, you know exactly what I'm talking about. 100% of the budget for Illinois currently is going towards paying benefits for pensions. We already talked about how pensions were budgeting on a 7.6% return on investment in order to stay afloat or even vaguely liquid. And over that period of time, they were supposed to get 7.6. They only made 0.7% return on their investment. And that's with the stock market the way it's working now. So combine this debt profile with a downturn in the stock market. Some sort of collapse in delinquencies relating to autos could absolutely feed it. But remember, all the experts are already suggesting that we should expect a downturn in the stock market for a bunch of other reasons, right? It's overpriced. It's overvalued. And a lot of folks talk about losing value on par with a 15 to 20% decline. That would cause all kinds of trouble. If to take it to the next step, I know I've mentioned this in previous shows, but if the pension problem accelerates and people start screaming for a solution to the problem, you can bet that ultimately the solution to the problem will be that the Fed steps in, the government steps in to bail it out. And if they do, they're not going to go and reach for money that already exists. They're going to print money and they're going to pay off the pension recipients with that in a lump sum. They might buy them out. Who knows? Maybe this will be the death knell of pensions, right? You'll have to take the cash out value instead of getting it over your lifetime. But then remember, that's cash that goes directly into the hands of people who will then spend it on living, which gives it higher velocity, which results in higher inflation. Now, for those of you who don't know what velocity is, we've mentioned it on previous shows, but money that goes directly into the hands of people who will then immediately spend it has high velocity. It means it shoots into the economy very, very quickly. Why didn't we see velocity with the money that was printed in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, with all the billions and billions of dollars worth of bailouts that we did for real estate? None of that money had velocity. It stayed between banks. The bailouts went to banks. Banks held that money in their accounts. When they did lend it, it didn't go into the hands of people. It went into the hands of another bank that was financing someone's purchase of a home. So it never went into your hands to buy milk and bread and fuel for your car and pay your rent and all these other kinds of things. It all had low velocity because it wasn't in your hands. This would spell a whole different problem. If inflation does what it does when these things happen, suddenly every dollar you own buys less once that money gets into circulation. That's another thing that could kick us over the edge. So there's a lot of these things that could play in terms of what you need to do. I've preached this before. I think you reevaluate where your investments are, how leveraged you are. I don't think there's any reason why someone in real estate needs to necessarily say, I'm out, I want the cash. Why would you want the cash if one of your expectations is that inflation is really going to kick you? I wouldn't want it in cash under those circumstances. I'd want it in something that folks always need, food, shelter, those kinds of things are at the top of people's lists. Just make sure your investment is secure enough that you could weather a downturn. And let's also consider that for a second. If you are in a buy and hold strategy and you're currently renting, take a look at what rentals did in that area with the last downturn. Now, if you're like an awful lot of areas, or at least if you're like my area, rents did not go down. Rents kind of didn't grow for a little while, but they actually grew quite a bit right after the downturn as folks moved from financing a home and paying a mortgage to having to pay rent. So keep that in mind. I don't know of any of my investor clients that I've dealt with over the years who I'm still in contact with ending up being in trouble and not being able to keep their properties. There were some people that were absolutely overextended. We had a guest, on just this. We're going to have a guest who's going to talk to us this Friday. I've already done the interview. I did the interview Friday. I'm going to edit it and post it so it'll be ready for you guys on Friday. He lost $50 million in the downturn. So there's a guy who was clearly exceptionally leveraged. And learned a lot of lessons from that. So it'll be a great opportunity for you to pick up some of that knowledge on Friday for that interview. But these are all things we need to keep in mind. These needs to serve as warnings, not no trespassing signs when it comes to moving into the world of real estate investment. It just means be smart. Pay attention to your numbers. Look at what's happened in the past in those areas during downturns and see if you can spot trends that maybe influence what might happen in an upcoming downturn, a similar downturn in your area. Okay, folks, I hope that's been some great brain food for you. I hope we have fed you well today. Just a little bit of an update. I'll be moving my son up to college starting this Thursday. There will absolutely be a show on Friday. It's already ready to go and ready to be posted. There may be a couple of interruptions, so there may be a couple of reruns. Next week, I'm going to be with him that whole time, helping him get settled and make sure that he's got everything that he needs. So there may be some shenanigans, or maybe I'll do a show from the road. We'll have to see how that pans out. In any event, I do appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say on these subjects. I hope it is as useful for you to hear me talk about this stuff as it is for me to hear myself say it out loud. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you all next time.